This is a brief comment about the end of the Euthyphro, what's going on with Socrates and Euthyphro there, and what's going on in philosophy generally when it comes to these kinds of things. The Euthyphro ends without Socrates and Euthyphro reaching a definition of the pious, at least not one that satisfies Socrates' criteria for knowledge. The dialogue ends in a state that is referred to in the Apology that I didn't talk about much there. It's called in Greek Aporia. And in Greek, the word Aporia means perplexity, but also means an impasse or a point where there's nowhere further to go. For instance, a kind of cul-de-sac in thought, or actually literally in motion. A cul-de-sac is a place where you can't go any further, right? It's a place where the road just stops and it ends up in a circle. Now, it's important that aporia refers to perplexity and not confusion. The difference that I see between perplexity and confusion is perplexity is a point at which we don't know what to believe. We have a number of questions that we can't answer, and all of the answers that we've come up with have led us to reject them because there's something about those answers that just doesn't answer the question or answers the question incorrectly or doesn't satisfy the criteria we have for an answer. Consider, for instance, the answers that Euthyphro offers Socrates as a definition of the pious. Socrates sees something wrong with all of them. Some of them are relativist answers, and the problem with those relativist answers is that Socrates is looking for what the pious means universally, what it means for everybody. It can't mean different things to different people and have a general meaning that applies to all of them. People who are very committed to relativist ideas will answer questions like Euthyphro did at first by saying, well, some people say it's this, some people say it's that, some people say it's the other. It's kind of whatever the individual believes. Well, it may be that we have individual beliefs about something, but that doesn't mean that all individual beliefs are equal or are equally true. Some of our beliefs can be shown to have no logic behind them. Some of our beliefs can be shown to be at odds with what's observable. Some of our definitions or our ideas or our opinions or beliefs can be shown to be self-contradictory. And that's one of the problems that Socrates sees in a kind of relativist definition. It also doesn't answer the question that Euthyphro really needs to know the answer to. If the pious is different things to different people at different times in different places, then there's no way for Euthyphro to be certain that prosecuting his father is pious. So that definition of the pious would be self-defeating for Euthyphro. They go through other definitions, and Socrates finds all of them equally wanting. The problem with the definition that says it's what the gods love, Socrates says, well, first of all, the gods, as depicted in Greek myth, disagree with each other, have conflict with each other. So that if it's what the gods love, at one point they may love one thing, at one point they may love something totally opposite. And one god may love something and another god despise it at the same time. So that can't be a good definition. Is it something that is good for the gods, that benefits the gods? Well, here Socrates takes a different tack. How is it that we benefit the gods? If the pious is service to the gods, what is it that human beings, mere human beings, could do that the gods could possibly need or benefit from? Socrates also dismisses the idea that the pious is what we do in order to get favors from the gods. This is a different approach altogether. That approach to the problem is that Socrates thinks that that definition is rather impious because it suggests that our relationship to the gods is one where we do something for them and they do something for us, a quid pro quo arrangement, an exchange arrangement. That doesn't seem very fitting for the gods, and it seems a very abusive or exploitive way for us to treat the gods. So all of these definitions kind of lead them to have no definition anymore. What good is that? Well, here's where the difference between perplexity and confusion becomes very important. Socrates thinks that perplexity is good. The reason perplexity is good is that once all of our beliefs have been stripped down, once we recognize our ignorance, then we're ready to look for the truth. In fact, not just ready, but eager to look for the truth, because we recognize we don't know. And then we'll be ready to start looking at all kinds of other possibilities. We'll be keen, we'll be critical, but we're not confused. Confusion means you don't understand what's going on. Well, Socrates understands perfectly what's going on. He just doesn't have an answer. That's a huge difference. Not understanding what's going on would imply that he doesn't understand why any of these definitions aren't working. He doesn't understand why the pious needs a definition. He doesn't understand how to go about trying to find a definition. But that's not where Socrates is. He's at a position where he knows what would count as a definition, something universal, something essential, something that would apply to every instance of the pious. In some terminology, this kind of definition is called intentional, intensional, meaning you're looking into the thing, into the essence of the thing. He knows that's what kind of definition he's seeking. Euthyphro, on the other hand, it's not clear to me whether Euthyphro is perplexed or confused. The dialogue ends with Euthyphro just having to move on. Some of the dialogues that involve this kind of aporia ending end with the interlocutor of Socrates, the one he's talking to, getting very angry. In the Meno, for instance, Meno becomes very frustrated with Socrates, and Socrates keeps trying to get Meno to talk further and keep discussing, and Meno in the end finally just gets fed up. It's easy to see why he would get fed up. After all, Socrates annoyed people so much that they sentenced him to death for it. At least that's one way to understand what happened in his trial. So if you're reading the dialogues and you can't follow what's going on, that's confusion. If confusion is happening, maybe you should talk to me about your understanding of reading the text. If aporia or perplexity is going on, and you read these dialogues and you get it, you understand what they're saying, but then you're led to wonder, well, what the hell? I don't have an answer to this question. Good. Perplexity is good. It's good for you. Why is it good for you? As Socrates says, it's good for you because you'll start to ask more questions. You will look for answers. There's another way to go about perplexity and aporia, and this leads us to a difference between Socrates' approach to aporia and a group of philosophers called the Pyrrhonists. They were followers of an alleged philosopher called Pyrrho. There's scant or maybe no evidence that there was a person called Pyrrho. This was sort of a legendary figure. But the Pyrrhonists definitely existed. They were philosophers who were very skeptical, to the very end skeptical. They approached philosophy in a similar way to Socrates, but they drew very different conclusions than Socrates. The Pyrrhonists, when approaching perplexity, use it as an argument for why we don't know anything. So a typical approach by the Pyrrhonists would be to take one set of beliefs and an opposite set of beliefs show how the two different camps cancel each other out, and then draw the conclusion that, therefore, we can't know anything. So when it comes to something like the pious, Socrates' approach would be characterized by Socrates blowing up all of Euthyphro's definitions, and then from that point saying, okay, we've reached perplexity, let's go look for a definition. The Pyrrhonists would instead note that Euthyphro's original definitions cancel each other out because they're contradictory to one another. And from that contradiction, the Pyrrhonists would conclude, we can't really know what the pious is. That's a skeptical conclusion to draw about what we can know and can't know. And the Pyrrhonists all have that sort of skepticism. One important Pyrrhonist is a Roman philosopher named Sextus Empiricus. And since we're moving into the classical philosophers, that is to say the Romans, the Latin writing philosophers, although he also wrote in Greek, as did Epictetus, they were both really Roman more than they were Greek in terms of their culture, where they grew up. So Sextus Empiricus was a 2nd to 3rd century of the Common Era, also known as AD. We don't really have clearer dates than that. Sometime in the 2nd century till sometime in the 3rd century. But he wrote a very long book called Against the Academics. And the academics were the people that followed the philosophy of Aristotle. Aristotle founded a school called the Academy. So the people that were followers of Aristotle were called academics. And they had very Aristotle-like ideas about knowledge. Aristotle was very optimistic about human knowledge and believed that we could know a lot, almost practically anything, through application of certain methods that Aristotle kind of illustrates in his books. That's not super important for you all. I'm not having you read Aristotle. What Sextus Empiricus did, however, is show that various of these academic thoughts are contradictory to other thoughts of the academics. In other words, within the school of thought called the Academy, there were different opinions that Sextus could show contradicted one another. And as a result, Sextus could say, they don't really know what they claim to know, because nobody knows. So Sextus's idea of what an aporia is it is an impasse, which is more like the original meaning of the word in Greek. It's a place where you can't go any further. Socrates' version of that impasse is, it's not that you can't go any further, it's that you recognize you don't know where to go. Very important difference. Why do I bring this up? Philosophy raises a lot of questions, and sometimes philosophers don't know the answers to those questions. What good are questions that you don't have answers to? That's a great question. One thing I would say is good about questions you don't have answers to is that keeping asking questions is a good attitude to have. If I don't know, I want to know. If I'm not satisfied with the answers I get, I want to know different answers. I want to probe into the answers I've been given. I want to challenge the answers I've been given. That's my thinking about it anyway. Another approach to aporia and perplexity, sometimes attributed to Socrates, and I think wrongly, is that perplexity allows us to be left in a state of wonder. Plato suggests this in various of his later dialogues, and I think that's more Plato's idea than Socrates's. This is just my own opinion, and as I think I've said before, I'm not an expert in ancient Greek and ancient Roman philosophy. I'm a fan, but not an expert. This other idea that I think Plato has, that he suggests is Socrates' idea, is that when you reach perplexity, you can take a step back from the everydayness of our questioning of our daily lives and just sit and contemplate and wonder about the question. And this contemplative attitude, this sort of meditative attitude that you can take as a result of aporia, as a result of perplexity, will sort of clear your mind and allow you to wonder about the question itself. I don't see Socrates as being that mystical. Or maybe it's my own impatience with mysticism. I don't know for sure anyway. But I think Socrates is more interested in demanding answers than in contemplating his own ignorance. I just don't think that's very impressive to Socrates. So that's it. That's my little comment about aporia and the role it plays in philosophy. Sometimes I think that philosophy is a way of just refining the questions that we've got and keeping the questions going.